Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Impact Data Source webinar, TEAs, What to Know in 2017. I'm Michael Kester, partner and lead EB-5 economist, and I'll be leading the presentation today. For starters, just wanted to let you know that if you have any questions, please go ahead and type them. You'll see a little question box on your webinar pop-up screen over to the right, towards the bottom. I will try to get to any questions at the end of the presentation, but if any questions we're not able to get to, we'll go ahead and email you, contact you personally, and try to answer those to the best of our ability. We're recording the webinar as well, and so we'll be sending out a recording of this afterwards, also with PDF copies of the slides as well. So again, thank you for joining the webinar today. This time of year is always an interesting time for EB-5 TEAs under the current state of the program, because the states are starting to change over their data, and there's a lot of different kind of moving pieces and things going on to be aware of. And so coupled on top of that, we also have potential proposed legislation. There's the DHS proposed rules sitting out there as well, all that could potentially impact how TEAs might be calculated in the future. So there's a lot going on right now, as there always is. And so this webinar, we're going to kind of touch on a little bit of everything, talk about what you need to know based on how things are currently done. It sounds like, I'm not sure if it's a 100% done deal yet, but it sounds like EB-5 will be extended through September 30th. With just a clean extension of the program without any changes. But in between now and then, there could be potential new legislation that pops up. Something could happen with the DHS proposed rules. So we'll kind of touch on a lot of different aspects of all of that today. So again, feel free to write in any questions. We'll try to answer them to the best of our ability. Just a little bit of background on us. We're Impact Data Source. We're a 20-plus-year-old economic consulting and research firm. We've been involved with EB-5 for about 7 years now, since around 2010. On our non-EB-5 side of the business, we do economic research and analysis and consulting for local economic development deals, typically deal with some sort of an incentive. We provide in-house models and do one-off reportings of all shapes and sizes for local EDCs that are looking at potential businesses and prospects coming into their area when there's some sort of incentives that might be negotiated, and we provide reporting and analysis to try to help them make a decision on those incentives. We're able to leverage our experience there into EB-5, and our main service offerings in the EB-5 program are the comprehensive EB-5 job studies for regional center projects, and also the targeted employment area analysis and letter assistance for all EB-5 projects, direct and regional center. So outside of our own work, we're heavily involved with the industry as well. We also provide a lot of industry tools, our free map. We provide a free TEA review service as well, and we're typically brought in pretty early on in the process, because the first two questions mainly asked in the EB-5 project is A, at least under the current landscape, is A, is my project in the TEA, and B, how many jobs my project creates. So we try to provide some free assistance with those types of analysis regarding the TEA and also the job creation to help you get started on your project to see how it might fit with EB-5 and see how viable of an EB-5 project it might be. We're also brought in a lot to assist on RFEs and NOIDs as well. So it's kind of our plate of service offerings there for EB-5. So in this webinar, we're going to cover a variety of things. We're going to do a quick check on just why do we care about TEAs, why are we here, what are we talking about. A lot of the stuff I'm going to try to get through a little bit, maybe more quicker than normal. We have a YouTube channel where we have some videos set up that kind of talk about the basics of TEAs and things like that. So if you're new to the industry and don't know much about TEAs as of yet, if I go through something too quickly, We have some videos that might answer some of your questions, and I'm always available to chat by phone or by email to answer anything at all. So, so we're going to talk about, how things are looking currently. Again, as of now, things are status quo. Moving forward, states are still certifying high unemployment TEAs, but now there's new data that's been released. We'll check on that. We'll talk about some possible changes to come, as well as we talked about, ongoing legislative proposals, the proposed rules by DHS, and all of that. So we'll just kind of jump in again, a quick, check on, why do we care about TEAs? Well, the main reason, of course, is under the current program, the TEA is the make or break issue to see if you qualify for the reduced investment to $500,000 instead of $1 million. So almost all projects, under the current landscape, are in TEAs for it to be a marketable, viable EB-5 project. Currently, two ways to make a TEA. Rural areas, pretty straightforward. Either you kind of hit two boxes, check off two boxes, or you don't. But the majority of projects are not rural, and they have to rely on high unemployment area calculations. That's where it gets a little bit more complicated, and we'll jump into that a little bit more here. So again, just quickly, the last 4 or 5 years, 98% of EB-5 projects have been located in TEAs. So just to kind of show you how important the question still remains. We often get asked, I've got a direct EB-5 project, not a regional center project. Does that mean I still have to worry about the TEA, or are the rules different, et cetera? And, the TEA regulations currently, are the same for both direct and regional center projects. So everything we talk about here will be applicable to both. So first, we're going to jump into what's going on under the current EB-5 program. So the key here is there's new unemployment data that has been finalized. States are starting to use that, and so there's a lot of kind of ramifications of that going on. So what is the new data? Why is this happening? So under the current EB-5 program, the high unemployment numbers get updated, basically every year. Again, we're dealing with the states here, and the states typically update once a year. For rural TEAs, you don't have to deal with the states. It's a the data gets updated much less often, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But for high unemployment, dealing with the states, we've got to think about new national thresholds. There's new county and tract data that go involved in the census share methodology, et cetera. We're not going to get into the weeds too much on that. There's a lot of things changing to be aware of, and possibly depending on where you're at in the EB-5 timeline, it might be important to check, is my project still a TEA based on this new data? Or if I have a new project, I want to make sure I'm looking at the latest data to kind of analyze the TEA. So for high unemployment TEAs, which the majority of people will be worried about, under the current program, there's just one criteria, and it's based on an area that has to hit 150% of the U.S. rate. So states are now changing over from calendar year 15 data to calendar year 16. As you can see here, the threshold is dropping from 8% down to 7.4%. So we have a lower threshold to clear. We'll talk a little bit more about how that may or may not affect your project later. The key is, takeaways, almost the majority, I say, especially the EB-5 heavy states have updated to the new data. California updated yesterday. New York will not be updating until the middle of this month, so here in a few weeks, according to what they told us. But going forward, for 2016, the threshold will be 7.4% that these TEA areas need to hit. So some details on TEAs. So again, we're going to talk about the two types of ways to make a TEA currently, rural and high unemployment, and we'll dig into the aspects of that. We'll kick in with rural first. It's more straightforward. There's also less to think about on rural potentially changing going forward, at least based on the proposals. They haven't changed the rural definitions too much, but as I previously mentioned, to qualify as a rural, currently you have to just hit two boxes, and it's pretty cut and dry. Either you do or you don't. The first is you got to be outside of a metropolitan statistical area. If you're inside of an MSA, no chance to qualify as rural. You got to go to the high unemployment, which is the more complicated route that we'll talk about more. If you're outside of an MSA, you also need to be outside of a city or town with a population of 20,000 or more. So what kind of data are we looking at for rural? It's based on the decennial census, so it doesn't change that often. So, you know, you can rest assured that if your project was rural, you know, last year, shouldn't change, you know, anytime soon, at least under the current definitions of the program. So the next census, you know, possibly changing around 2020, but shouldn't be any changes anytime soon. So how is a rural TEA designated? So the nice thing about rural TEAs is we don't have to deal with the states. We don't have to deal with the states on this one, so you can provide your own evidence when you file your I-526 petition that the project location meets the two criteria. Moving on to high unemployment areas. A high unemployment area, again, 150% of the national average rate. So how is this determined? So what is an area that has 150% of the U.S. national average? So typically, as we mentioned, this unemployment data is updated annually, and there's multiple data sources that are going into this what's called the census share methodology, and we're dealing with the states here, determined by the state authorities. So what kind of areas can be a high unemployment area? In the most simple cases, if you're lucky, at least for EB-5 purposes, the entire county or the MSA qualifies. But in most cases, we're getting down to a grouping of census tracts or a grouping of census block groups, depending on the state. So here's kind of a simple example of how things are currently done with high unemployment TEAs. So here is the black star indicates a project site. This is a map of census tracts. The orange census tracts are high unemployment tracts that qualify on their own. The clear census tracts do not qualify. So you can see the project location here is within a census tract that does not qualify on its own, but you can see here it's surrounded by a lot of high unemployment tracts. So if we are able to aggregate these census tracts together mathematically and take a weighted average, we get to the, we can meet the threshold on that. So this is kind of a simple example. It's not typically not this easy, but how things are currently done under the current program. So we've updated our map as well, and I'll bring that up. So we provide an annual map. At the end of this, we also have some links to, again, our YouTube videos that will show, sorry, my dog is barking there, that will show the updated data for calendar year 16. So it's laid out in this similar configuration as our previous maps have been. This year just updated with the calendar year 2016 data that the states are using. So here we can see, if we scroll in, we can get closer to the census tract levels. It will indicate which census tracts qualify on their own. And depending on where your project is, you may or may not have to try to aggregate based on the math there. Our map also shows rural TEAs that qualify. So if you're outside of an MSA and the location is outside of a city or town with a population of 20,000, it'll show that as well. So it'll show that in the blue. So you can see here, Okeechobee County, Florida is rural in its entirety. If you have any questions on our map, let us know. We also have some links up here in the top left to the free TA review and free preliminary jobs analysis as well. So again, in EB-5 with everything, if you can keep it simple, that's great. If the location of your project qualifies at the county or MSA level, and there's really no calculations to be done. Very easy to get a letter, but in most cases we have to rely on census tracts, sometimes census block groups, and you must obtain a letter from the state's TEA certifying agency to prove that the project is located in a TEA. So a key takeaway, as most of you probably know, the state processes can differ, and they can differ often, very drastically. this next box that just popped up shows some different things. Some of them use different data, different times, snapshots of data, rolling averages. They differ when they update. They differ on how many configuration, how many census tracts they might allow. Some of them are allow you to use block groups, some don't. In Texas, instead of dealing with one statewide agency, you have to get down to deal with the city mayors and the county judges. So high unemployment area TEAs can sometimes be tricky. And of course, just let us know as you have any questions on that. So the key under the current regulations is that USCIS is deferred to the states to determine the shape of the TEA. So the states are technically allowed to basically get as flexible as they would like in determining the area, as long as it's contiguous. And so some states are very flexible, and others are not. So while USCIS does defer to the states, and that's still the case, at least as of now, USCIS will still review the letter very carefully to ensure the correct methodology and everything's contiguous and the timeliness of the data. This slide, just a quick snapshot on how the national averages have decreased over the last 3 or 4 years. And so a question we often get asked is, last year's threshold was 8%. This year is 7.4%. That means it's easier to get a TEA, right? Unfortunately, with all the moving pieces that go into the census share methodology, there's county level data, census tract level data, and you're eventually comparing to a national threshold. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. So it depends on a case-by-case basis. So each location should be analyzed on a case-by-case basis to see if it qualifies as a TEA. And depending on how things have changed, again, it might be, you may need to make sure that your project is still eligible and may need to get a new TEA letter. So again, as a quick recap, what evidence we provide for evidence of a TEA. First, for a rural area, again, there's no state involvement. You can provide your own evidence. For high unemployment, if the MSA or county qualifies on its own, you can provide your own evidence or get a state letter, which is usually pretty easy. But in most cases, you're dealing with tracts and block groups, and that's when you need the TEA letter from the state authority. So one key element to TEAs is the timeliness of the letter. So typically the TEA question is one of the very first questions that are asked of a project that's contemplating going down the EB-5 path. However, there's usually a pretty big time gap between when you want to know if your location's a TEA versus when you're actually going to be getting investors. And the TEA letter really comes into play at the time of the immigrant's investment or at the time of the filing of the immigrant of the I-526 petition. So it's at the time of the investment or at the time. So you need to be make sure you have your TEA letter has is using current data, the most up-to-date data that the state is using. So the question is, does a TEA letter expire? In short, yes, under the current TEA legislation, it does. Now, it's nice that some of the legislative proposals have put forth language to certify a letter for to certify a letter for 2 years or even potentially more. But we don't know if that's actually going to happen or not, or what kind of TEA lock-in legislation might happen. So right now, USCIS does not provide the best guidance on this issue. So our general guidance is that we consider a TEA letter no longer valid once there's new data available that is more recent for you to use. So again, not great guidance from USCIS. So it's a very important issue to discuss, with your attorneys. Using outdated letter as a risk factor to the petition. California is no longer, and one point to note, California just recently, in the most recent letter we got from California, they're no longer including the language that they used to that said the TEA is good for a year. So I'm not sure what was going on behind the scenes there, if there was any real reason they removed that language, or if it was just their attorneys had them remove it. I'm not sure, but just something to note. I emailed the state to see if there was a reason or what the reason was for them removing that language, but they have not did not get back to me as of yet. But I'll keep you guys posted on that if I hear back from them. So again, filing an I-526, best practice is to file, with a letter using the most current data. So that is kind of done with the current discussion. So now is talk about the upcoming possible changes to TEAs, which I think a lot of you are here and are concerned about. So there's a lot of things to consider. Again, was there any legislative changes this week? No. It appears to be a clean extension through September 30th. At least for now, no changes to the EB-5 TEA regs. But again, there could possibly be new regulations or legislation before September 30th. So first, we talked about there's the DHS proposed rules and there's possible legislation as well. So first, the DHS proposed rules are still kind of sitting out there. So in January, DHS released these proposed rulemakings, and the comment period ended here earlier in April. So the final regulations or rules that might happen are yet unknown. We don't know when they might happen either, but this is a quick recap of what the proposed regulations were. A drastic increase of the minimum investment amounts. So TEA going from 500 to 1.35 million, and standard investment going from $1 million to 1.8. So that's a big jump on both. Another key element that the DHS proposed rules have removing state authorities from the TEA process. So DHS would take over. So this might, be good for the same process. The same process and data would be applicable to everyone. There wouldn't be a lot of different state data to look at, and you kind of have a better idea of what to do. So possibly less confusion there, but with everyone, everyone's concerns with how USCIS is currently adjudicating I-924s, I-526s, I-829s, etc. I think there's be big concerns about how DHS would handle taking over TEAs as well. And most importantly, the DHS proposed rules severely limit the grouping of census tracts. So in short, the DHS proposed rules were limiting TEAs to contiguous and adjacent only. So in this map here, the project location is located within this orange bounded census tract. So to make the math work, we would be only able to work with the tracts that would be surrounding it. So if you couldn't get the map to work using those tracts, then you're out of luck for a TEA going that route. So it is very limiting compared to the current rules, where the states kind of can be somewhat as flexible as they want, more or less. As kind of a real-world example of this, we took a look at downtown Memphis, which has significant unemployment. But we took a look at what if a project was in this aqua blue census tract right here. As you can see, there's no high unemployment census tracts, which are indicated by the orange surrounding it. So even though this project is really in a downtown Memphis that has significant unemployment, it would not qualify under the DHS proposed rules. And the DHS proposed rules had some issues, kind of clarifying some things on cities and towns and other things like that weren't as significant. So DHS proposed rules, would be unclear when these would take effect. I've heard some in the industry think that something could happen by summer with these. Others thinking that, there's no way that anything could happen before September 30th. Again, the specifics of the final rules are definitely unknown. The comment period is now closed, so I think DHS is reviewing those comments. And of course, the DHS proposed rules could be superseded by legislative changes for sure. So legislative changes, moving on from the DHS proposed rules. So, we've been kind of doing the same song and dance now, it seems like, for over 2 years, with lots of different drafts being produced, lots of discussion, but I think things just getting kicked down the road year after year. So, a lot of things to chat about. And just as a kind of a quick visualization, here's a kind of a TEA determination tree on how things currently look under the current system with, is it rural or is it high unemployment? So not too complicated, but some of the other proposals from proposed changes. from Grassley, Leahy, and Goodlatte, et cetera, show how how complicated TEAs could be potentially going forward. And so here, to kind of discuss, it seems on the legislative changes, we're going to kind of take a closer look at the Grassley-Leahy proposal that just came out within the last few weeks. So it seems to kind of build on the previous proposals that they had with some adjustments. Here, TEAs would also be removed from the states and would be determined by DHS. The TEA designations would be good for 2 years, so that's certainly a positive. And also the investment amounts would be narrowed. While the TEA would increase from 500 to 800, the non-TEA amount would stay at $1 million. And then there's also a lot of language about visa set-asides, which we're not going to get into in detail here. But and then kind of the biggest issue would be, what are the new definitions of non-rural TEAs? So a lot of the legislative proposals going forward have proposed, changing up the non-rural TEAs to kind of mimic new market tax credits. So instead of just looking at potentially one criteria, like high unemployment, the way it's currently done, where you can have a good bit of anomaly, looking at mirroring it kind of similar to new market tax credit. And you have to hit, at least under the current, there's been some different proposals with hitting 3 out of 3 criteria, some hitting 2 out of 3. The most recent Grassley proposal has to hit 2 out of 3 criteria of hitting a certain unemployment rate, a certain poverty rate, and a certain family income rate, so similar to NMTC. And so it seems like this new market tax credit idea seems to be gaining a little bit more steam. Of course, who knows exactly what or when might happen, but it seems as though we're kind of moving towards a potential more restrictive TEA policy, but narrowing the gap between the TEA and the non-TEA thresholds, kind of as you see in the most recent Leahy proposal. Of course, anyone's guess kind of what might end up happening, but I think it's certainly something to pay attention to. And you can certainly let us know if you have any questions on if you want to take a look and see if your project if it looks to potentially qualify under any of these proposals. We're happy to kind of take a review for you. But again, a lot going on, and just so to kind of wrap up, some similarities between the DHS proposed rules and the proposed legislations. Again, both remove the state authority for certifying TEAs and put it to DHS. And again, appears to stay focused on census tracts and very limited groupings compared to what you see now. A lot of the states, such as New York, allow block groups currently, and none of these proposed rules have talked about block groups. So it seems like staying focused on tracts and very limited groupings of those. So I'm just going to discuss some typical questions we see a lot, and then get into any other questions that we might have received here that you guys submitted here through the webinar. So just kind of go quickly through these. So can you help certify any area in any state as a TEA? Are there certain criteria you need to look at and evaluate? So yeah, as we discussed, states currently, they do things a lot differently. So look at everything on a case-by-case basis. And, we're happy to take a look at your site for you, because a lot of times it's not that clear-cut on whether it might qualify as a TEA. The second question we often get asked, is there a fast way to get a list of TEAs by state? Do certain states already have pre-designated TEAs? So, yes and no. A lot of state agencies will list kind of some qualifying areas that qualify on their own. But, based on the current, landscape, there's, a lot of different mathematical possible combinations to make TEAs for different project sites. So the states aren't able to list, exhaustive list of all potential TEA eligible areas. Again, we kind of covered that third question. What do you need to send to support for your, depending on what kind of TEA it is, what kind of support do you need? And then the last question, how long does it take to get a TEA letter right now? So again, it can depend drastically. We can provide a thorough, free TA review and get that to you in about 24 hours as far as on our end. And then in that response, we typically let our clients know how long, based on the state, do we think it might take to get it. So some states will turn it around in a day. Other areas take a long time, and they do a lot of due diligence. So it just depends on the state right now. So now let's see if there's any additional questions from that you guys submitted through the webinar. So one question is, can you use a different block of census tracts if you need to renew your TEA from the one you originally submitted? So the short answer to that one is yes, but it depends on the state. So the question is, back in 2015, I only had to use 5 census tracts to get my TEA to work. But now I've got to use, 11 or 12 census tracts for my TEA to work. So as long as we can get the math to work and the state authority will sign off on it, then yes, there's no issue in changing up the area. Again, the area is left open to the states. So in most cases, changing up the area isn't usually too big of a deal. If you've already got a certification, you can typically get a recertification. One example for a state like California, if California limits their number of tracks you can use to 12 tracks. So now if you had a letter, from last year that you only used 10, but based on this new data, you had to use 14, then at least based on California's posted rules, they would not recertify. So typically, yes, but there are certain occasions where it might not work out. The question was, can I describe the odd states that don't use the current annual national unemployment threshold? Sure. So the majority of these states, just go off a calendar year basis. So like we said, the states either have or already in the process of switching from calendar year 15 to calendar year 16. But some states will go on a July to June 12 month instead of a calendar year 12 months. So that means they have a different threshold that they go off of, and the calculations are a little bit different. Some states a few years ago would do would update every month and do a rolling 12-month average, but I don't think anyone does that anymore. So I think there's just a few states that go July to June instead of calendar year. So still a 12-month period, just a different snapshot. So next question, can I still file my EB-5 petitions now, or do I need to wait until the changes are made by the government? So yeah, you can certainly still file now. I'm not an attorney, but it seems like a lot of people, depending on where they're at, are trying to work to try to beat any potential changes to see if they can get in under the existing TEA rules, the existing threshold at the $500,000 level before they might be increased. So you can certainly file now, it shouldn't. I mean. Okay, let's see if we have any more questions. No, I think that's it. So again, if we went through anything a little too quickly, here's our YouTube channel that has some videos, and here's some links to our other online resources, our free TA review, our map, and our blog, and some other items as well. And as always, feel free to email me, or give me a call, or text if you have any questions at all. And again, thank you for joining the webinar. We will post the recording and also the slides. I know the audio might have been cutting in a little in and out at the beginning there, so if there's any parts that you might have not been clear on, happy to kind of chat through it and answer any questions you have. And thank you again.